In the bustling heart of New York City, where dreams were born and shattered with equal fervor, lived Sarah Thompson, a woman of unparalleled kindness and humility. Her gentle spirit seemed at odds with the harsh concrete jungle she called home, but Sarah navigated the city's unforgiving streets with a grace that turned heads and softened hearts. Sarah's tiny apartment in the Bronx was a far cry from the glittering penthouses that dotted Manhattan's skyline, but to her, it was a palace of possibilities. Each morning, she would wake before the sun, her calloused hands testament to the countless hours she spent scrubbing floors and washing dishes at the opulent Starlite Hotel. Yet, no matter how grueling her work or how little sleep she got, Sarah always had a smile for everyone she met. Little did Sarah know that her life was about to change dramatically, all because of a chance encounter with the hotel's most notorious guest, Victoria Blackwood. Victoria was everything Sarah was not: wealthy, powerful, and ruthlessly ambitious. As the CEO of Blackwood Industries, she was used to getting her way, crushing anyone who dared to stand in her path. When she swept into the Starlite Hotel that fateful Monday morning, the staff scattered like leaves in a storm, all except for Sarah, who stood her ground with a warm smile and a good morning. "Ma'am." Victoria's cold eyes narrowed as she took in Sarah's worn uniform and kind expression. "You," she snapped, her voice dripping with disdain. "My suite better be immaculate. I have important guests arriving this evening, and I won't tolerate any inadequacies." The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Sarah nodded, her smile never wavering. "Of course, Ms. Blackwood. I'll make sure everything is perfect for you." As Sarah turned to go, Victoria's perfectly manicured hand shot out, grabbing her arm. "Wait," she hissed, her eyes fixed on Sarah's neck. "That locket. Where did you get it?" Sarah's hand instinctively went to the small, heart-shaped pendant that hung around her neck. "Oh, this? It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she passed away." Victoria's face drained of color, her grip on Sarah's arm tightening painfully. "Impossible," she whispered. "That locket. I know it. Who was your mother?" Confused and a little frightened, Sarah stammered. Her name was Elizabeth. "Elizabeth Thompson." Victoria released Sarah's arm as if it had burned her, stumbling back. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." Without another word, she turned on her heel and fled, leaving Sarah staring after her in bewilderment. Little did Sarah know that this brief encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would turn her world upside down and challenge everything she thought she knew about herself and her past. As the days passed, Sarah couldn't shake the memory of Victoria's strange reaction to her locket. She threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth despite the CEO's obvious disdain. But no matter how hard she tried, Victoria seemed to go out of her way to make Sarah's life difficult. It all came to a head one evening when Victoria was hosting a lavish party in the hotel's grand ballroom. The cream of New York society was in attendance, the room a sea of designer gowns and glittering jewelry. Sarah, along with the other staff, had been working tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect. As she carefully maneuvered through the crowd with a tray of champagne flutes, Sarah overheard snippets of conversation that made her blood run cold. "Can you believe it?" a woman in a red dress whispered to her companion. "Victoria Blackwood, giving a party for the daughter she abandoned all those years ago?" "I heard the girl doesn't even know," her friend replied, shaking his head. "Imagine growing up thinking you're nobody, only to find out you're heir to one of the biggest fortunes in the country." Sarah's hands began to shake, the champagne glasses clinking dangerously. Could they be talking about her? No, it was impossible. Her mother had raised her alone, struggling to make ends meet. There was no way she could be. Suddenly, a hush fell over the room. Sarah turned to see Victoria Blackwood standing on a small stage, microphone in hand, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria began, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I've gathered you all here tonight for a very special reason. After years of searching, I've finally found something I thought was lost forever." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as Victoria's eyes scanned the room, finally landing on her. With a jolt of horror, she realized that every eye in the place was now trained on her. "Sarah," Victoria called out, her voice softening. "Sarah Thompson. Would you please join me up here?" The tray slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers, champagne glasses shattering on the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. Sarah stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. "It's all right, dear," Victoria said, her tone gentler than Sarah had ever heard it. "Please, come up here. There's something you need to know." As if in a dream, Sarah found herself moving forward, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. She climbed the steps to the stage, acutely aware of her shabby uniform amidst all the finery. Victoria took Sarah's hand, and to everyone's shock, including Sarah's, the formidable businesswoman's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That locket you wear, it belonged to my sister, Elizabeth. Your mother." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "What?" she whispered, her mind reeling. "Elizabeth was my younger sister," Victoria continued, her grip on Sarah's hand tightening. "We had a falling out many years ago, and she left, taking you with her. I've been searching for you both ever since. When I saw that locket, I knew. I'd finally found you." Sarah's head spun, memories of her mother flashing before her eyes. The struggles, the hardship, the love that had sustained them both. "But why?" she managed to choke out. "Why didn't my mother ever tell me?" Victoria's face crumpled with guilt. "Because I was cruel, Sarah. I was young and ambitious, and I said terrible things to your mother when she told me she was pregnant. She left to protect you from me, from this world of wealth and corruption. She wanted you to grow up kind and humble, everything that I wasn't." The room was dead silent, hanging on every word of this real-life soap opera unfolding before them. Sarah felt as if she were standing outside herself, watching this surreal scene play out. "I've changed, Sarah," Victoria pleaded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Losing you and Elizabeth made me realize what truly matters in life. I've spent years trying to make amends, to become someone worthy of being your family. Can you ever forgive me?" Sarah stood there, overwhelmed by the tide of emotions threatening to drown her. Her whole life had been a lie, or at least, not the whole truth. The woman she had thought of as her enemy was, in fact, her aunt. And now, surrounded by the glitterati of New York, she was being offered a life she had never dared to dream of. But as she looked out at the sea of curious, hungry faces, Sarah realized something profound. The life she had led, the values her mother had instilled in her, the person she had become, none of that had been a lie. Whether she was Sarah Thompson, humble hotel maid, or Sarah Blackwood, heiress to a fortune, she was still herself. With that realization came a surge of strength. Sarah squared her shoulders and faced Victoria, her voice steady as she said, "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, Ms. Blackwood. Aunt Victoria. But I'm willing to try to understand." A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. This was not the tearful reunion they had expected. But Sarah wasn't finished. However, she continued, her voice growing stronger, "I won't abandon who I am or where I come from. My mother raised me to be kind, hardworking, and to never look down on others. If you truly want me in your life, you'll have to accept all of me, including the part that will continue to work at this hotel, not as your niece, but as Sarah Thompson." Victoria's eyes widened in surprise, but then a slow smile spread across her face. "You truly are your mother's daughter," she said softly. and I wouldn't have it any other way." As the party erupted into excited chatter, Sarah stepped down from the stage, her head held high. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she would face it on her own terms, with the same grace and humility that had carried her this far. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test her resolve, challenge her beliefs, and ultimately lead her to discover the true meaning of family, forgiveness, and the power of staying true to oneself. The days following Victoria Blackwood's shocking revelation were a whirlwind for Sarah Thompson. Her life, once defined by its simplicity, had been turned upside down. The humble hotel maid now found herself thrust into a world of luxury and privilege that she had only ever glimpsed from afar. Victoria, true to her word, respected Sarah's wish to continue working at the Starlite Hotel. However, the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Where once Sarah had been invisible to the hotel's wealthy patrons, she now found herself the subject of intense scrutiny and gossip. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. "Can you believe it? That's her, the long-lost Blackwood heiress. I heard she's worth millions now. Why on earth is she still scrubbing toilets?" Sarah tried her best to ignore the stares and the not-so-subtle comments, focusing instead on her work with the same dedication she had always shown. But it wasn't easy. Her co-workers, once friendly and supportive, now regarded her with a mix of awe and suspicion. Some, like her friend Maria, remained loyal, while others seemed to resent her newfound status. One particularly trying afternoon, Sarah was cleaning the lobby when she overheard a conversation that made her blood boil. "It's all an act, if you ask me," sneered Veronica, one of the receptionists who had always looked down on the cleaning staff. "She's probably just playing humble to get more sympathy. I bet she'll be living in a penthouse and bossing us all around before the month is out." Sarah's hands clenched around her mop, knuckles turning white. She wanted to turn around and defend herself, to explain that this wasn't a choice, it was who she was. But her mother's words echoed in her mind: "True strength is in kindness, Sarah. Let your actions speak louder than words." Taking a deep breath, Sarah continued mopping, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. But the words stung, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. Was she foolish to cling to her old life? Was she denying herself opportunities out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to her past? These questions plagued her as she made her way home that evening to the tiny Bronx apartment she had shared with her mother. Victoria had offered her a room at her penthouse, but Sarah had declined, needing space to process everything that had happened. As she unlocked the door, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. Every corner of the small space held memories of her mother: the faded armchair where she used to read Sarah bedtime stories, the tiny kitchen where they'd dance while doing dishes, the windowsill lined with thriving plants that Elizabeth had lovingly tended. Sarah sank onto the worn sofa, fingering the locket around her neck. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "What am I supposed to do? How do I honor your memory while embracing this new life?" A soft knock at the door startled Sarah out of her reverie. Wiping her eyes, she opened it to find Victoria standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," Victoria said, her usual commanding tone replaced by something softer. I thought you might like some company." Sarah hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let her aunt in. Victoria entered, her designer outfit and perfectly coiffed hair a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. "It's not much," Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious of the peeling wallpaper and the water stain on the ceiling. But Victoria wasn't looking at the apartment's flaws. Her eyes were fixed on a framed photo of Elizabeth, her sister, holding a young Sarah on her lap. Both were beaming at the camera, their happiness palpable even through the faded image. "She looks so happy," Victoria murmured, reaching out to touch the frame. "I never saw her smile like that when we were growing up." Sarah moved to stand beside her aunt, studying the photo she knew by heart. "She was happy," she said softly. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough." Victoria turned to Sarah, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was such a fool," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had everything, money, power, success, but I didn't understand what truly mattered. Elizabeth knew. She chose love and kindness over wealth and status, and look at the amazing daughter she raised." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. It was the first time Victoria had spoken about her mother without a trace of the old bitterness or guilt. "I know I can never replace Elizabeth," Victoria continued, taking Sarah's hands in hers. "And I wouldn't want to. But I hope you'll give me a chance to be a part of your life. To learn from you, and maybe, in time, to be the kind of aunt you deserve." The sincerity in Victoria's voice touched something deep inside Sarah. For the first time since the revelation at the party, she felt a glimmer of hope that something beautiful could come out of this upheaval. "I'd like that," Sarah said, squeezing her aunt's hands. "But you have to understand, this is who I am. The lessons my mom taught me, the life we lived, it's not something I can just leave behind." Victoria nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I wouldn't expect you to. In fact, I was hoping you might teach me a thing or two about living with grace and humility." Sarah couldn't help but laugh at the idea of the formidable Victoria Blackwood learning humility. But as she looked into her aunt's eyes, she saw genuine desire there, a hunger for something her wealth and power had never been able to provide. "All right," Sarah said, her smile widening. "Let's start with dinner. I make a mean pot of chili, and I bet you haven't had a home-cooked meal in years." As they moved to the tiny kitchen, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she was beginning to see that she didn't have to choose between her past and her future. Perhaps there was a way to bridge both worlds, to honor her mother's memory while embracing the new opportunities before her. Little did Sarah know, this moment of connection with her aunt was just the calm before a storm that would test her resolve and challenge everything she thought she knew about her family's past. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the Starlite Hotel feeling more centered than she had in days. Her conversation with Victoria had given her a new sense of purpose. She was determined to navigate this new reality on her own terms, staying true to herself while opening her heart to the aunt she was just beginning to know. As she changed into her uniform in the staff locker room, Sarah overheard two of her co-workers, Tom and Lizzie, engaged in a heated whispered conversation. "I'm telling you, something's not right," Tom was saying, his voice urgent. "I overheard Mr. Garrett on the phone yesterday. He was talking about Sarah and Victoria Blackwood, saying something about keeping the secret buried." Sarah froze, her heart pounding. Mr. Garrett was the hotel's manager, a stern man who had always treated her fairly, if distantly. "You're being paranoid," Lizzie scoffed. "What secret could there possibly be? The whole world knows Sarah's story now." "I don't know," Tom insisted, but he sounded scared. And then he mentioned something about the fire and how she can never know the truth. Sarah's blood ran cold. Fire? What fire? And what truth was being kept from her? Before she could process what she'd heard, the locker room door swung open, and Mr. Garrett himself walked in. He stopped short when he saw Sarah, his face paling visibly. "Sarah," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't expect to see you here so early." Sarah straightened, forcing a smile onto her face. "Good morning, Mr. Garrett. Is everything all right? You look a bit under the weather." Mr. Garrett's eyes darted around the room, not quite meeting Sarah's gaze. Yes, everything's fine. I wanted to let you know that Ms. Blackwood called. She's requested that you assist with a special project in her suite this afternoon." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. Was this related to what Tom had overheard? Of course, I'll be happy to help. As Mr. Garrett hurried out, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The mention of a fire nagged at her. There had been a fire in their old apartment building when Sarah was very young, barely more than a toddler. Her mother had never liked to talk about it, always changing the subject when Sarah brought it up. Throughout the morning, Sarah went through her usual routine in a daze, her thoughts swirling with questions. By the time she made her way to Victoria's suite that afternoon, she had worked herself into a state of nervous anticipation. She knocked on the door, half expecting Victoria to answer. Instead, the door swung open to reveal a face she had only seen in old photographs, a face that, despite the passage of years, was unmistakable. "Hello, Sarah," said the man, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm your Uncle Jack. It's so good to finally meet you." Sarah stumbled backward, her mind reeling. Uncle Jack? But that was impossible. Her mother had always told her that Jack, Victoria's husband, had died in a car accident before Sarah was born. This can't be real," Sarah stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's face fell, guilt and sadness etching deep lines around his mouth. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I know this must be a shock. Please, come inside. There's so much we need to talk about." As if in a trance, Sarah followed Jack into the suite. Victoria was there, pacing nervously by the window. When she saw Sarah, she rushed over, taking her hands. "Sarah, darling, I'm so sorry," Victoria said, her voice trembling. "We never meant for you to find out like this. We were going to tell you, I swear." Sarah pulled her hands away, anger bubbling up inside her. "Tell me what? That my uncle isn't dead? That my whole life has been built on lies?" She turned to Jack, tears stinging her eyes. "Where have you been all these years? Why did my mother tell me you were dead?" Jack sank into an armchair, suddenly looking every one of his years. "It's a long story, Sarah. One that started long before you were born, with a fire that changed everything." As Jack began to speak, Sarah felt the foundations of her world crumbling beneath her feet. The truth, it seemed, was far more complicated and painful than she could have ever imagined. Jack's story unfolded like a twisted fairy tale. He spoke of a night 25 years ago when a fire had broken out in the Blackwood family's summer home. Victoria and Elizabeth had been there, along with Jack and a man named Robert Thompson, Sarah's father. "Robert and I were business partners," Jack explained, his voice heavy with regret. "We had stumbled onto some irregularities in the company's finances. Evidence of embezzlement and fraud on a massive scale." Victoria picked up the thread, her usual confidence replaced by a vulnerable honesty Sarah had never seen before. "We were young and ambitious. We thought we could fix it ourselves, cover it up before anyone found out. But Robert, he wanted to go to the authorities." The night of the fire, Jack continued, we had all gathered to decide what to do. The argument got heated. Robert threatened to expose everything, to bring down the company we had worked so hard to build. Sarah listened in horror as the story unfolded. A struggle, a knocked-over lantern, flames that spread faster than anyone could have imagined. In the chaos of the evacuation, Robert had been trapped inside. "We tried to save him," Jack said, his voice breaking. "I swear we did. But by the time the firefighters arrived, it was too late." "Your mother was devastated," Victoria added softly. "She blamed us, Jack and me, for Robert's death. She threatened to go to the police, to tell them everything." "So you, what? Faked Uncle Jack's death to keep her quiet?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp with disbelief and anger. Jack nodded, shame written across his face. "It was Victoria's idea. We thought if Elizabeth believed I was dead, she would keep the secret to protect my memory. We never imagined she would leave, taking you with her." Sarah's mind was spinning. The weight of these revelations threatened to crush her. Her father, a man she had only known through her mother's stories, had died trying to do the right thing. And the aunt she had just begun to trust had been part of the cover-up all along. "Why now?" Sarah demanded, rounding on Victoria. "Why bring all this up after so many years?" Victoria's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Because I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. Because finding you, seeing the amazing woman you've become despite everything, it made me realize how wrong we were. We've spent years trying to make amends, donating to charities, trying to right the wrongs of the past. But it wasn't enough. You deserved to know the truth." Sarah stood up abruptly, needing to put distance between herself and these people who had upended her world not once, but twice. I need some air," she managed to choke out before fleeing the suite. She ran through the hotel corridors, barely noticing the startled looks from guests and staff alike. Her feet carried her to the one place she had always felt safe, the small staff garden on the hotel's roof. As she burst through the door onto the rooftop, the late afternoon sun momentarily blinded her. Sarah stumbled to the railing, gripping it tightly as she struggled to catch her breath. The city sprawled out before her, indifferent to the turmoil raging inside her. Everything she thought she knew about her family, about herself, had been a lie. Her mother, the one person she had always been able to count on, had kept this enormous secret from her. And for what? To protect her? Or to protect the memory of a man who had died trying to expose the truth? As the initial shock began to fade, a new emotion took its place, a burning desire for justice. Her father had died trying to do the right thing. Her mother had spent her life running from a past she couldn't escape. And Sarah? Sarah had been caught in the middle, an innocent victim of other people's mistakes and cover-ups. In that moment, standing high above the city that had been her home, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't run, as her mother had. She wouldn't hide, as Jack had. And she wouldn't bury the truth, as Victoria had tried to do for so many years. No, Sarah would do what her father had been prevented from doing. She would expose the truth, no matter the cost. But she would do it her way, with the kindness and integrity her mother had instilled in her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah squared her shoulders and turned back toward the roof access door. She had a long road ahead of her, full of difficult conversations and hard choices. But for the first time since this whole saga began, she felt a sense of purpose. Sarah Thompson, daughter of Elizabeth, niece of Victoria, and heir to a legacy more complex than she could have ever imagined, was ready to forge her own path. A path that would honor her father's courage, her mother's kindness, and her own unwavering sense of right and wrong. Little did she know, her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of the Blackwood Empire, test her newfound family ties, and ultimately lead her to a truth even more shocking than the one she had just uncovered. As she reached for the door handle, Sarah paused, taking one last look at the city skyline. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same grace and determination that had carried her this far. The humble hotel maid was gone, replaced by a woman ready to take on the world and win. The following days were a blur for Sarah as she grappled with the earth-shattering revelations about her family's past. She threw herself into her work at the Starlite Hotel, finding solace in the familiar routines of cleaning and organizing. But even as she scrubbed floors and changed linens, her mind raced with plans and possibilities. Sarah knew she couldn't simply ignore what she had learned. The truth about her father's death and the subsequent cover-up weighed heavily on her conscience. Yet, she was acutely aware of the complexities of the situation. Exposing the truth could potentially destroy not only the Blackwood Empire but also the livelihoods of countless innocent employees who depended on the company for their Survival. As she pondered her next move, Sarah found an unexpected ally in Maria, her longtime friend and co-worker at the hotel. One evening, as they were finishing up their shift, Maria cornered Sarah in the locker room. "All right, chica," Maria said, her dark eyes filled with concern. "Spill it. You've been walking around like a zombie for days. What's going on?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But the weight of her secret was becoming unbearable, and Maria had always been a steadfast friend. Taking a deep breath, Sarah poured out the whole story: the fire, her father's death, the years of deception, and her own internal struggle over what to do next. Maria listened in stunned silence, her eyes widening as Sarah's tale unfolded. When Sarah finally finished, Maria let out a low whistle. "Dios mío," she breathed. That's a lot, Sarah. No wonder you've been so distracted lately." Sarah nodded, feeling a measure of relief at having shared her burden. "I just don't know what to do, Maria. Part of me wants to march straight to the police and tell them everything. But then I think about all the people who could lose their jobs if Blackwood Industries goes under. And Victoria and Jack, they've done terrible things, but they seem genuinely remorseful. Is it right to destroy their lives over mistakes made decades ago?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You know, my abuela used to say that justice without mercy is no justice at all. But she also said that mercy without justice is dangerous." Sarah looked at her friend quizzically. "What do you think that means in this situation?" Maria smiled, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's hand. "I think it means you need to find a way to bring the truth to light without causing unnecessary harm. You're not just Sarah the maid anymore, chica. You're Sarah Blackwood, heir to an empire. Maybe it's time you started using that power for good." Sarah's eyes widened as the implications of Maria's words sank in. She wasn't powerless in this situation. In fact, she might be in the perfect position to effect real change. "You're right," Sarah said, a new determination filling her voice. "I can't undo the past, but I can shape the future. And I think I know just where to start." The next morning, Sarah marched into Victoria's office at Blackwood Industries, her head held high. Victoria looked up from her desk, surprise flickering across her face. "Sarah," she said, rising to greet her niece. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "No, Aunt Victoria, everything is not all right. But I'm here to change that." Over the next hour, Sarah laid out her plan. She would not expose the company's past misdeeds to the public or the authorities, at least, not yet. Instead, she wanted to use her newfound position as a Blackwood to transform the company from within. "We're going to make things right," Sarah declared, her voice filled with passion. "We'll start by setting up a fund to compensate any victims of the company's past fraudulent activities. Then, we're going to implement new transparency measures to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Victoria listened in stunned silence as Sarah outlined her vision for a more ethical, socially responsible Blackwood Industries. When Sarah finally finished, Victoria slumped back in her chair, looking both exhausted and oddly relieved. "You truly are your father's daughter," Victoria said softly, a mix of pride and regret in her voice. "He would be so proud of you, Sarah. And you're right, it's long past time we made amends for our mistakes." With Victoria's reluctant blessing, Sarah threw herself into her new role as the company's conscience. She worked tirelessly, poring over financial records, meeting with lawyers and accountants, and drafting new company policies. It was grueling work, far removed from the simple life she had known as a hotel maid. But Sarah approached each task with the same diligence and care she had always. brought to her cleaning duties. As news of the changes at Blackwood Industries began to spread, Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight. Business magazines hailed her as a rising star in the world of corporate social responsibility. Social media buzzed with stories of the humble hotel maid turned corporate reformer. But not everyone was thrilled with the new direction of the company. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving a board meeting, she was cornered by Maxwell Thornton, one of the company's longest-serving executives. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Thompson," Thornton hissed, his eyes cold with anger. "You may think you're doing the right thing, but you're putting everything we've built at risk. There are powerful people who won't stand for this meddling." Sarah stood her ground, meeting Thornton's glare with a steady gaze. "I'm not playing any games, Mr. Thornton. I'm simply trying to run this company in a way that honors both its past and its future. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then perhaps they should reconsider their priorities." As Thornton stormed off, Sarah couldn't shake a feeling of unease. She had known there would be resistance to her changes, but Thornton's thinly veiled threat suggested that the stakes might be higher than she had realized. That evening, as Sarah was working late in her new office, she received an unexpected visitor. Jack, her long-lost uncle, slipped into the room, his face etched with worry. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you. It's about your father, and about the fire. There's something you need to know." Sarah's heart began to race. "What is it, Uncle Jack? What more could there possibly be?" Jack sank into a chair, looking older and more vulnerable than Sarah had ever seen him. "The night of the fire," he began, his voice shaking, "it wasn't an accident. And Robert, he wasn't the only victim." As Jack's story unfolded, Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet once again. The fire, it seemed, had been deliberately set, not by Jack or Victoria, but by a third party who had been desperate to keep the company's secrets buried. And Sarah's father hadn't been alone in the house when it burned. "There was a woman with him," Jack said, his eyes filled with pain. "We never knew who she was, but she didn't make it out either. The police ruled it an accident, but I've always suspected. I've always feared that there was more to the story." Sarah's mind reeled with this new information. A deliberate act of arson. An unknown woman. And a mystery that had lain dormant for over 2 decades. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah demanded, her voice hoarse with emotion. Jack met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Because I think whoever set that fire is still out there, Sarah. And I'm afraid that your efforts to reform the company might have stirred up old ghosts. You're getting too close to the truth, and there are people who will do anything to keep their secrets buried." As the implications of Jack's words sank in, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She had thought she was simply righting old wrongs, but it seemed she had stumbled into something far more dangerous. The past, it appeared, was not content to stay buried. In that moment, Sarah realized that her journey was far from over. She had set out to honor her father's memory and bring integrity back to the Blackwood name. Now, she found herself at the center of a decades-old mystery, with unknown enemies lurking in the shadows. But as the weight of this new reality settled on her shoulders, Sarah felt something else stirring within her, a fierce determination to uncover the whole truth, no matter the cost. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to back down now. "Thank you for telling me this, Uncle Jack," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "I know it couldn't have been easy. But I need you to understand something, I'm not going to stop. Whatever happened in the past, whoever was responsible, I'm going to find out. And I'm going to make sure justice is served." Jack nodded, a glimmer of pride shining through his worry. "You're braver than I ever was, Sarah. Just be careful. You don't know what you're up against." As Jack left, Sarah turned to look out the window at the glittering New York skyline. The city that had once seemed so vast and unknowable now felt like a web of secrets and lies, with her at the center. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She had started this journey as a humble hotel maid, armed with nothing but her integrity and her mother's lessons of kindness and perseverance. Now, she stood at the helm of a corporate empire, with resources and power she could have never imagined. But at her core, she was still that same girl from the Bronx, determined to do what was right no matter the odds. As she turned back to her desk, Sarah's eyes fell on the locket she always wore, her last tangible connection to her mother. She clasped it tightly, drawing strength from the memories it held. "I won't let you down, Mom," she whispered. "I'm going to finish what Dad started. Whatever it takes." With renewed purpose, Sarah threw herself back into her work. But now, alongside her efforts to reform Blackwood Industries, she had a new mission: to unravel the mystery of the fire that had claimed her father's life and set in motion the events that had shaped her entire existence. Little did Sarah know, her determination to uncover the truth would lead her down a path fraught with danger, forcing her to confront not only shadowy enemies but also her own understanding of right and wrong. The humble hotel maid was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined, and the outcome would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. As Sarah delved deeper into the company's past, she began to notice subtle signs that someone was watching her every move. Anonymous emails appeared in her inbox, warning her to let sleeping dogs lie. Unfamiliar cars lingered outside her apartment building. And more than once, she could have sworn she heard footsteps echoing behind her as she walked home late at night. But Sarah refused to be intimidated. If anything, these attempts to frighten her off only strengthened her resolve. She knew she was getting close to something big, something that could potentially shake the foundations of not just Blackwood Industries, but the entire New York business world. One rainy afternoon, as Sarah was poring over old company files in a dusty storage room, she stumbled upon a photograph that made her blood run cold. It was a group photo from a company picnic, dated just weeks before the fatal fire. In it, she saw her father, Robert Thompson, standing next to a woman she didn't recognize. But it wasn't the woman that caught Sarah's attention, it was the man. Standing on Robert's other side, his arms slung casually over Robert's shoulders. The man was younger, with fewer lines on his face and more hair on his head, but there was no mistaking him. It was Maxwell Thornton, the same executive who had threatened Sarah just weeks earlier. Sarah's mind raced. Thornton had been at the company for decades, but she had assumed he was just another faceless executive. Now, seeing him standing next to her father, looking for all the world like they were best friends, she realized there was much more to the story than she had been told. As she stared at the photograph, trying to make sense of this new piece of the puzzle, Sarah failed to notice the storage room door slowly creaking open behind her. It wasn't until she heard the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked that she realized she was no longer alone. "I'm afraid you've seen too much, Miss Thompson," came a familiar voice, dripping with menace. "Or should I say, Miss Blackwood? You've been quite the thorn in my side these past few months." Sarah turned slowly, her heart pounding, to find herself face to face with Maxwell Thornton. The once polished executive looked disheveled, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and desperation. In his trembling hand, he held a pistol pointed directly at Sarah's chest. "Mr. Thornton," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What is this about? What are you so afraid of?" Thornton's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Afraid? My dear, I've spent the last 25 years afraid. Afraid that someone would uncover the truth. Afraid that the house of cards we built would come tumbling down. And then you came along, with your noble ideals and your quest for justice, threatening to destroy everything." As Thornton spoke, the pieces began to fall into place in Sarah's mind. "It was you," she breathed, her eyes widening with realization. You set the fire that killed my father." Thornton's face twisted with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Your father was a fool," he spat. "He was going to ruin everything we had worked for, expose all our carefully hidden secrets. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. The fire, it wasn't supposed to happen like that. No one was supposed to get hurt." "But they did get hurt," Sarah said, her voice rising with anger. "My father died. An innocent woman died. And you've been living with that guilt all these years, haven't you?" For a moment, Thornton's composure cracked, and Sarah saw the weight of his actions etched in the lines of his face. But then the moment passed, and his eyes hardened once more. "It doesn't matter now," he said, his grip tightening on the gun. "What's done is done. And I'm not going to let you undo a lifetime of work with your misguided crusade for justice." As Thornton's finger tightened on the trigger, Sarah's mind raced. She thought of her mother, of the life they had built together from nothing. She thought of Victoria and Jack, of the second chance they had been given. And she thought of her father, of the principles he had died defending. In that moment, Sarah made a choice. She would not go down without a fight, but neither would she stoop to Thornton's level of violence and deceit. "You're right, Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice calm and clear. "What's done is done. But that doesn't mean we can't make things right. It's not too late to tell the truth, to face the consequences of our actions. Isn't that what my father would have wanted? What you would have wanted, before all of this?" Thornton's hand began to shake, the gun wavering. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "There's no coming back from this. There's no redemption for someone like me." Sarah took a cautious step forward, her eyes never leaving Thornton's face. "There's always a chance for redemption," she said softly. "My mother taught me that. It's never too late to choose to do the right thing." As Sarah's words hung in the air, the storage room door burst open. Victoria and Jack rushed in, followed closely by a team of security guards. In the confusion, Thornton's gun clattered to the floor, and he sank to his knees, all the fight gone out of him. As the guards led Thornton away, Victoria enveloped Sarah in a fierce hug. "Oh, my darling girl," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "When we realized where you were, who you were with. I've never been so frightened in my life." Sarah returned the embrace, feeling the last walls between her and her aunt finally crumbling. "It's over now," she said, her voice muffled against Victoria's shoulder. "It's finally over." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew that in many ways, this was just the beginning. There would be police investigations, court trials, media frenzies. The truth about Blackwood Industries' past would finally come to light, with all the consequences that entailed. Yet as Sarah looked around at the faces of her newfound family, Victoria, Jack, and yes, even the absent Thornton, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would be difficult, but she knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone. In the days that followed, Sarah worked tirelessly with lawyers, police, and company executives to bring the full truth to light. True to her word, she sought justice tempered with mercy. Thornton and others involved in the original cover-up faced legal consequences, but Sarah also pushed for a plea deal that would allow them to make amends through community service and restitution rather than lengthy prison sentences. The media frenzy was intense. Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight as the story of the humble hotel maid who uncovered a decades-old corporate scandal captivated the nation. But even as reporters clamored for interviews and paparazzi camped outside her apartment, Sarah remained grounded, never forgetting the lessons her mother had taught her about kindness and humility. One evening, as the chaos of the past few weeks began to settle, Sarah found herself back on the roof of the Starlite Hotel. As she looked out over the city's skyline, she felt a presence beside her. It was Maria, her friend and former coworker. "So, Ms. Big Shot," Maria said with a grin, bumping Sarah's shoulder with her own. "You solved the mystery, saved the company, and became a national hero. What's next? Running for president?" Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I think I'll leave politics to someone else. I've got my hands full right here." Maria's expression softened. "Your mom would be so proud of you, you know. You've done amazing things, Sarah." Sarah fingered the locket around her neck, feeling a familiar pang of loss mixed with a new sense of purpose. "I hope so," she said softly. "I just tried to do what she taught me, to always strive to do what's right, no matter how hard it might be." As they stood there in companionable silence, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. From a humble hotel maid to the heir of a corporate empire, she had faced challenges she never could have imagined. She had uncovered painful truths, confronted dangerous enemies, and made difficult choices. But through it all, she had remained true to herself and the values her mother had instilled in her. She had found a way to honor her father's memory while also offering a chance at redemption to those who had wronged him. And in doing so, she had not only transformed a company but had also begun to heal the deep wounds in her family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Sarah felt a sense of excitement for what the future might hold. She knew there would be more challenges ahead, running a major corporation, continuing to push for ethical business practices, and navigating her new place in society. But she also knew that she was ready to face whatever came her way. "You know," Sarah said, turning to Maria with a smile, "I think I'm going to keep my old uniform. Just to remind me where I came from." Maria laughed. "Only you would think of that, chica. But that's why we love you." As they made their way back inside, Sarah took one last look at the city sprawled out before her. The humble hotel maid had indeed triumphed, not just over adversity and deceit, but over the temptation to let power and wealth change who she was at her core. Whatever the future held, Sarah Thompson Blackwood was ready to face it, with kindness, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The next chapter of her story was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see where it would lead. 6 months had passed since the dramatic events that had shaken Blackwood Industries to its core. Sarah Thompson Blackwood, once a humble hotel maid, now sat at the helm of one of New York's most influential corporations. The view from her corner office was breathtaking, the entire city sprawled out before her like a glittering tapestry. Yet, as she gazed out at the urban landscape, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia for her simpler life. The transition hadn't been easy. Despite her innate intelligence and strong moral compass, Sarah had a lot to learn about running a multinational corporation. There were late nights poring over financial reports, tense board meetings where her every decision was scrutinized, and a constant barrage of media attention that left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. But true to her nature, Sarah faced each challenge with grace and determination. She surrounded herself with mentors and advisors, not too proud to admit when she needed help. Victoria, in particular, had become an invaluable ally, guiding Sarah through the intricacies of corporate politics while supporting her vision for a more ethical Blackwood Industries. As Sarah reviewed the latest quarterly reports, a soft knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Jack, his face creased with worry. "Sarah, we have a situation," he said, his voice tense. "It's about the Thompson Foundation." The Thompson Foundation had been Sarah's brainchild, a non-profit organization she had established in her father's memory. Its mission was to support whistleblowers and advocate for corporate transparency. It was Sarah's way of ensuring that what happened to her father would never happen to anyone else. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, instantly alert. Jack hesitated, then handed her a tablet. On the screen was an email, its contents making Sarah's blood run cold. An anonymous source was threatening to release damaging information about the foundation unless Sarah agreed to return things to the way they were. "They're trying to blackmail us," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "But why? The foundation hasn't done anything wrong." Jack shook his head. "I don't think it's about the foundation, Sarah. I think someone's trying to force you out of Blackwood Industries. Someone who doesn't like the changes you've been making." Sarah's mind raced. She had known there would be resistance to her reforms, but she hadn't expected such a direct attack. As she pondered her next move, her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk, a picture of her mother, smiling and carefree, taken long before the hardships that had shaped their lives. Drawing strength from the memory of her mother's resilience, Sarah stood up, her jaw set with determination. "We're not going to give in to blackmail," she declared. "Whatever they think they have on us, we'll face it head on. It's time to go on the offensive." Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into uncovering the source of the threat. She hired top-notch cybersecurity experts to trace the email, reached out to her contacts in the media for any leads, and even enlisted the help of some of the whistleblowers the Thompson Foundation had supported. As she delved deeper into the investigation, Sarah began to notice strange occurrences around her. Documents went missing from her office. Her personal email was hacked. And one evening, as she was leaving work late, she could have sworn she saw a figure lurking in the shadows of the parking garage. The pressure was beginning to take its toll. Sarah found herself jumping at shadows, second-guessing her every move. The board was growing restless, concerned about the potential scandal brewing. Even Victoria seemed worried, suggesting that perhaps Sarah should step back, at least temporarily. But Sarah refused to be cowed. She knew that backing down now would betray everything she had fought for. More than that, it would betray her father's memory and the lessons her mother had taught her about standing up for what was right. As the deadline set by the blackmailers approached, Sarah made a bold decision. Instead of giving in to their demands, she called a press conference. Standing before a sea of flashing cameras and eager reporters, Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I stand before you today to address some rumors that have been circulating about the Thompson Foundation and Blackwood Industries. There are those who would have you believe that we have something to hide, that we can be scared into abandoning our mission." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. Somewhere out there, she knew, was the person or people behind the threats. She hoped her words would reach them. "To those individuals, I have this to say: we will not be intimidated. We will not be silenced. And we most certainly will not return to the old ways of doing business. Whatever you think you have on us, I invite you to bring it to light. We have nothing to hide." A murmur rippled through the assembled press corps. This was not the carefully scripted damage control they had been expecting. Blackwood Industries and the Thompson Foundation stand for transparency, integrity, and justice, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Those aren't just empty words to us. They're principles we're willing to fight for, no matter the cost." As Sarah concluded her speech, the room erupted into a frenzy of questions. But she had said what she came to say. With a polite nod to the reporters, she stepped away from the podium, her head held high. The response to Sarah's press conference was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting her stance. Other companies reached out, pledging their support for corporate transparency. And most importantly, tips began pouring in from individuals claiming to have information about who was behind the blackmail attempt. But the path forward was far from smooth. The blackmailers, enraged by Sarah's defiance, made good on their threats. They released a series of documents that, taken out of context, seemed to implicate the Thompson Foundation in some questionable dealings. For a few days, it seemed as though Sarah's gamble had backfired spectacularly. The media turned on her, with pundits questioning her competence and integrity. The Blackwood Industries board called an emergency meeting, and there was talk of forcing Sarah to resign. It was the darkest moment of Sarah's tenure as CEO, and for the first time since taking on the role, she found herself doubting her abilities. Had she been naive to think she could change things? Had her mother's lessons of kindness and integrity led her astray in this cutthroat business world? As she sat in her office late one night, grappling with these questions, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. It was Maria, her old friend from her hotel Maid days. Chica, Maria said, taking in Sarah's exhausted appearance. You look like you could use a friend. Sarah managed a weak smile. Maria? How did you get in here? Maria grinned. Please. I used to clean this place, remember? I know all the secrets. Her expression softened as she sat down across from Sarah. Now, tell me what's really going on. And don't give me any of that CEO talk. I want to hear from my friend Sarah. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt the walls she had built around herself crumbling. She told Maria everything, her fears, her doubts, the crushing weight of responsibility she felt. Maria listened patiently, and when Sarah finally fell silent, she reached across the desk and took her friend's hand. Sarah, mi amiga, listen to me. You are not alone in this fight. Look at all the people you've inspired, all the lives you've touched. You think your mama's lessons led you astray? No. They brought you exactly where you need to be. As Maria's words sank in, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose flooding through her. She wasn't just fighting for herself or even for Blackwood Industries. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of corporate greed. With newfound determination, Sarah threw herself back into the fray. She worked tirelessly to contextualize the documents that had been released, showing how they had been misrepresented. She reached out to the whistleblowers the Thompson Foundation had helped, and many came forward to share their stories, putting a human face on the foundation's work. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The truth, as it often does, came to light. The blackmail attempt was traced back to a group of former Blackwood executives who had profited from the company's less ethical past. They had hoped to force Sarah out and return to business as usual, but they had underestimated her resilience and the public's hunger for corporate accountability. As the full story emerged, Sarah found herself hailed as a hero once again. But this time, she was careful not to let the praise go to her head. She knew that the fight for transparency and ethics in business was far from over. This had been just one battle in a much larger war. In the aftermath of the scandal, Sarah implemented even more stringent transparency measures at Blackwood Industries. She also expanded the Thompson Foundation's work, creating a legal defense fund for whistleblowers and launching a nationwide campaign for corporate accountability. 1 year to the day after her fateful press conference, Sarah stood once again before a crowd of reporters. But this time, she wasn't alone. Flanking her were Victoria and Jack, their faces beaming with pride. And in the front row, cheering her on, were Maria and a group of Sarah's former co-workers from the Starlite Hotel. As Sarah began to speak about the progress that had been made and the challenges that lay ahead, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced her toughest test yet and had emerged stronger for it. The humble hotel maid had not only survived in this world of power and high stakes, she had thrived, all while staying true to the values that had defined her from the beginning. The road ahead would undoubtedly hold more challenges, more battles to be fought. But Sarah Thompson Blackwood was ready to face them all, armed with her integrity, supported by her found family, and guided by the enduring lessons of kindness and perseverance that her mother had instilled in her. As she concluded her speech to thunderous applause, Sarah's hand went to the locket she still wore around her neck. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, a smile playing on her lips. "We really did it." The humble woman had indeed triumphed, not just over adversity and deceit, but over the very system that had once seemed insurmountable. And in doing so, she had begun to change that system from within, one small act of courage at a time. As the warm glow of success from her recent triumph began to fade, Sarah Thompson Blackwood found herself facing a new set of challenges. The corporate world, it seemed, was not content to let her rest on her laurels. 2 years had passed since Sarah had taken the reins of Blackwood Industries, and in that time, she had transformed the company into a beacon of ethical business practices. The Thompson Foundation had grown into a powerful force for corporate accountability, and Sarah's rags to riches story had inspired millions around the world. But success, Sarah was learning, came with its own set of problems. It was a crisp autumn morning when Sarah received the news that would set in motion the next chapter of her journey. She was in her office, reviewing plans for a new sustainable energy initiative when Victoria burst in, her face pale with shock. "Sarah, have you seen the news?" Victoria asked, her voice trembling. Sarah looked up, concern etching her features. "No, what's happened?" Victoria wordlessly handed Sarah her tablet. The headline blared in bold letters, "Blackwood Industries accused of exploiting workers in overseas factories." Sarah felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She had worked tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of Blackwood's operations was above board. How could this have happened? As she delved into the article, the situation became clear. A rival company, Global Enterprises, had published an exposé claiming that one of Blackwood's subcontractors in Southeast Asia was violating labor laws and subjecting workers to inhumane conditions. "This is impossible," Sarah muttered, her mind racing. "We have strict oversight on all our partnerships. There's no way this could be happening without our knowledge." But as Sarah and her team began to investigate, they uncovered a web of deceit that went far deeper than they could have imagined. The subcontractor had gone to great lengths to hide their true practices, presenting a facade of compliance while subjecting workers to grueling conditions behind closed doors. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Overnight, Sarah went from being hailed as a corporate reformer to being vilified as a hypocrite. Protesters gathered outside Blackwood headquarters, demanding action. The company's stock price plummeted. For Sarah, the situation was a nightmare come to life. Everything she had worked for, everything she believed in, was being called into question. The board was pressuring her to distance the company from the scandal, to lay the blame entirely on the subcontractor and wash their hands of the situation. But Sarah knew she couldn't do that. It went against everything she stood for. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from Li Wei, a young woman who claimed to be one of the workers from the factory in question. Speaking in hushed tones, Li Wei painted a picture of the grim reality faced by the workers, grueling hours, dangerous conditions, and the constant fear of retaliation if they spoke out. "We believed in you, Ms. Blackwood," Li Wei said, her voice crackling over the long-distance line. "We thought that working for your company meant we would be treated fairly. Please, you must help us." The call steeled Sarah's resolve. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant facing the biggest challenge of her career. Against the advice of her PR team and the board, Sarah called a press conference. Standing before a sea of hostile reporters, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, I come before you today not to make excuses, but to take responsibility," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The conditions in our subcontractor's factory are unacceptable, and as CEO of Blackwood Industries, the ultimate responsibility lies with me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the carefully crafted statement they had been expecting. But taking responsibility doesn't just mean accepting blame, Sarah continued. It means taking action. Effective immediately, Blackwood Industries will be terminating our contract with the subcontractor in question. Moreover, we will be establishing a fund to compensate the affected workers and provide them with job training and placement services." The room erupted into a frenzy of questions, but Sarah held up her hand for silence. "But we're not stopping there," she said, her voice growing stronger. "This incident has shown us that our oversight measures, while stringent, are not infallible. So we're going to do something unprecedented in the corporate world." Sarah paused, knowing that her next words would send shockwaves through the business community. Blackwood Industries is going to open our entire supply chain to public scrutiny. We will be implementing a radical transparency initiative allowing independent auditors and members of the press full access to our operations, both domestic and international. No more hiding behind subcontractors or shell companies. From now on, if it bears the Blackwood name, it will meet Blackwood standards. And those standards will be open for all to see. The press conference exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, photographers' flashes blinded Sarah, but she stood firm, her head held high. In the days that followed, the business world reeled from Sarah's announcement. Critics called it corporate suicide, claiming that such transparency would destroy Blackwood's competitive edge. The company's stock price, already weakened by the scandal, took another hit. But Sarah stood firm. She flew to Southeast Asia, personally overseeing the closure of the offending factory and meeting with the workers. She listened to their stories, wept with them, and promised them that she would do everything in her power to make things right. As news of Sarah's actions spread, something unexpected began to happen. Consumers, tired of corporate doublespeak and empty promises, rallied behind Blackwood Industries. The company's commitment to radical transparency resonated with a public hungry for authentic, ethical business practices. Other companies, seeing the positive response, began to follow suit. A movement began to grow, with Blackwood at its center, pushing for a new era of corporate responsibility. But not everyone was pleased with this turn of events. Global Enterprises, the company that had exposed the factory conditions, was revealed to have its own skeletons in the closet. As Blackwood's transparency initiative gained traction, Global found itself under increasing scrutiny. Late one night, as Sarah was working in her office, she received a visitor. It was Maxwell Thornton, the former Blackwood executive who had once threatened her life, now released from prison and looking far older than his years. "You've done it, Sarah," Thornton said, his voice a mixture of admiration and regret. "You've changed the game. But be careful. There are powerful people who preferred the old way of doing business, and they won't go down without a fight." Sarah regarded Thornton warily. "Is that a threat, Mr. Thornton?" Thornton shook his head. "No, it's a warning. From someone who's seen the darkness this world has to offer. Watch your back, Sarah. And whatever you do, don't trust Global Enterprises. They're not what they seem." Before Sarah could press him for more information, Thornton was gone, leaving her with more questions than answers. As Sarah delved deeper into Global Enterprises' past, she began to uncover a disturbing pattern. The company had a history of exposing scandals in rival corporations, only to swoop in and acquire them when their stock prices plummeted. It was corporate raiding disguised as social responsibility. Sarah realized with a chill that Blackwood Industries had been their latest target. By exposing the factory conditions, Global had hoped to weaken Blackwood enough for a hostile takeover. But Sarah's radical transparency gambit had thrown a wrench in their plans. Now, Global was getting desperate. Sarah began to notice strange occurrences, important documents going missing, cybersecurity breaches, and whispered threats. It was clear that the battle was far from over. As Sarah prepared to go public with her findings about Global Enterprises, she received a chilling message. A photo appeared on her phone, a recent picture of her visiting her mother's grave, taken without her knowledge. The caption read, "Back off, or you'll be joining her." For the first time since taking over Blackwood Industries, Sarah felt truly afraid. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. But as the fear threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah's hand went to the locket around her neck. She thought of her mother's strength, of her father's courage, of all the people counting on her to stand up for what was right. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't back down. She had come too far, fought too hard, to give up now. Whatever global enterprises had planned, she would face it head-on. As she rallied her team and prepared for the fight of her life, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From a humble hotel maid to the leader of a corporate revolution, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. But the greatest challenges, and perhaps the greatest triumphs, still lay ahead. As Sarah looked out over the New York skyline, she steeled herself for the battle to come. The humble woman's fight for justice was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Little did Sarah know, the final confrontation would test not only her business acumen and her courage, but also her faith in humanity and her own capacity for forgiveness. The stage was set for a showdown that would shake the foundations of the corporate world and determine the future of Sarah's vision for ethical business practices. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across her office, Sarah made a silent vow. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same grace, determination, and unwavering integrity that had carried her this far. The humble hotel maid turned corporate crusader was ready for her final battle. The New York skyline glittered in the pre-dawn light as Sarah Thompson Blackwood stood at the window of her office, steeling herself for the day ahead. In just a few hours, she would be holding a press conference that could change the face of corporate America forever. But as she gazed out at the city she loved, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. After receiving the threatening message from Global Enterprises, Sarah had gone into overdrive, working tirelessly to gather evidence of the company's unethical practices. Her team had uncovered a trail of corporate espionage, bribery, and intimidation that stretched back decades. But Global wasn't going down without a fight. As Sarah's investigation intensified, so did the attacks on Blackwood Industries. Cyber attacks crippled their systems, false rumors circulated in the media, and several key employees received threats against their families. Through it all, Sarah stood firm, drawing strength from the memory of her parents and the unwavering support of her found family. Victoria and Jack had become her rocks, offering wisdom and comfort in equal measure. Maria, her old friend from her hotel days, had taken a leave of absence from her job to help Sarah navigate the media storm. As the sun began to rise, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but she knew instantly who it was from. Last chance, Ms. Blackwood. Walk away now, or face the consequences. Sarah's jaw clenched as she read the message. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she putting too many people at risk? Was her crusade for corporate ethics worth the potential cost? But then her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk, a picture of her mother, smiling and full of life. Next to it stood a more recent addition, a group shot of the workers from the Southeast Asian factory, their faces beaming with hope as they stood alongside Sarah at the opening of their new, ethically run workplace. In that moment, Sarah's resolve hardened. She had come too far, touched too many lives, to back down now. As she prepared to leave for the press conference, there was a knock at her office door. To her surprise, it was Maxwell Thornton, the former executive who had once tried to kill her. I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, Thornton said, his voice heavy with regret, but I couldn't let you walk into that lion's den without warning you. Sarah regarded him warily. Warning me about what? Thornton's eyes darted nervously around the room before he leaned in close. Global isn't just planning to discredit you, Sarah. They're going to try to destroy you completely. They have a mole inside Blackwood, someone who's been feeding them information for months. Sarah's mind raced. A mole? But who? She had been so careful, had trusted her team implicitly. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked, suspicion coloring her voice. Thornton's shoulders sagged. Because I've seen where this road leads, Sarah. I've been where Global's executives are now, willing to do anything to maintain power and wealth. It cost me everything, my integrity, my freedom, years of my life. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can help prevent history from repeating itself. As Thornton turned to leave, he paused at the door. Be careful, Sarah. And remember, in this world, trust is a luxury you can't always afford. With those ominous words ringing in her ears, Sarah made her way to the press conference. The auditorium was packed, cameras flashing as she took the stage. But as she prepared to speak, she noticed a commotion at the back of the room. To her shock, she saw Victoria being led away in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents. Jack stood nearby, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. Before Sarah could react, a voice boomed through the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the interruption, but we have breaking news. A man Sarah recognized as the CEO of Global Enterprises, Richard Hawthorne, strode onto the stage. With a shark-like grin, he addressed the stunned crowd. Ms. Blackwood was planning to make some very serious allegations against my company today. But I'm afraid she's been the victim of a terrible deception. He turned to Sarah, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Ms. Blackwood, did you know that your aunt, Victoria Blackwood, has been embezzling funds from your company for years? Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Victoria? It couldn't be. And yet, the late-night phone calls, the nervous glances, the insistence on handling certain accounts personally. Had Sarah been blind to the betrayal happening right under her nose? As evidence of Victoria's supposed crimes flashed on the screen behind them, Sarah felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she had worked for, every bit of progress she had made, seemed to be unraveling in an instant. But then, just as all seemed lost, a voice rang out from the back of the auditorium. Stop! I can't do this anymore. All heads turned to see a young woman pushing her way to the front. Sarah recognized her with a jolt. It was Amanda, her personal assistant. Tears streaming down her face, Amanda addressed the crowd. It's all a lie. I'm the mole. Global Enterprises blackmailed me into spying on Ms. Blackwood and planting false evidence against Victoria. But I can't stand by and watch them destroy a good person. The room erupted into chaos. As security guards moved to apprehend Hawthorne, Sarah locked eyes with Victoria, seeing relief and vindication wash over her aunt's face. In that moment, Sarah knew what she had to do. Stepping up to the microphone, she raised her voice above the din. Ladies and gentlemen, please. What we've witnessed here today is a perfect example of why corporate reform is so desperately needed. As the room gradually quieted, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Global Enterprises thought they could destroy me by attacking my family and my reputation. They believed that by discrediting me, they could stop the movement towards corporate transparency and accountability. But they underestimated one crucial thing, the power of the truth. Sarah's eyes swept the room, taking in the sea of reporters hanging on her every word. The truth is, our current system is broken. It allows companies like Global to operate in the shadows, using intimidation and deceit to maintain their power. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power to change things, to create a business world built on integrity and transparency. As Sarah laid out her vision for a new era of corporate responsibility, she could feel the mood in the room shifting. The shock and scandal of moments before were being replaced by a growing sense of hope and possibility. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Blackwood Industries, but as someone who has seen both sides of the corporate world. I've scrubbed toilets and I've sat in boardrooms. I've experienced poverty and privilege. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that ethical business practices are not just morally right, they're good for business, good for workers, and good for society as a whole. As Sarah's speech drew to a close, the room erupted into applause. Reporters clamored for questions, but there was one person Sarah needed to speak to first. Making her way through the crowd, she found Victoria, now free from handcuffs and engulfed in a fierce hug with Jack. "Aunt Victoria," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I doubted you, even for a moment." Victoria shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "Oh, my darling girl. You have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have told you about the threatening messages I was receiving from Global. I thought I could handle it on my own, protect you from it all. I should have known better than to underestimate you." As the two women embraced, Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Amanda standing there, looking terrified but determined. "Ms. Blackwood," Amanda began, her voice trembling. "I know I can never make up for what I've done, but I want you to know how sorry I am. They threatened my family, but that's no excuse. I'll accept whatever consequences come my way." Sarah studied the young woman for a long moment. She thought about Thornton, about second chances and the power of redemption. Finally, she spoke. "Amanda, what you did was wrong. But coming forward took real courage. If you're willing, I think your experience could be valuable in helping us strengthen our security protocols and protect other employees from similar situations." Amanda's eyes widened in disbelief. "You mean, you're not firing me?" Sarah shook her head. "No. But you'll have a lot of work to do to rebuild trust. Are you up for it?" As Amanda nodded vigorously, Sarah felt a warm hand on her arm. It was Maria, beaming with pride. "Look at you, chica," Maria said, her eyes twinkling. "The humble hotel maid, changing the world. Your mama would be so proud." Sarah's hand went to the locket around her neck, a smile tugging at her lips. "I hope so, Maria. I really hope so." In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah's press conference became a catalyst for change in the corporate world. The exposure of Global Enterprises' tactics sent shockwaves through Wall Street, leading to increased scrutiny of other companies' practices. Blackwood Industries' radical transparency initiative, once mocked as naive, became a model for other corporations to follow. Sarah found herself at the forefront of a new movement, pushing for legislation to protect whistleblowers and mandate greater corporate accountability. It wasn't an easy road. There were still those who resisted change, who clung to the old ways of doing business. But with each passing day, more and more people joined Sarah's cause. From factory workers to fellow CEOs, a growing chorus of voices was calling for a more ethical, transparent corporate culture. 1 year to the day after the fateful press conference, Sarah stood on the podium again. This time, she was accepting an award for Corporate Citizen of the Year. As she looked out at the audience, she saw faces both familiar and new, Victoria and Jack, beaming with pride, Maria and her old co-workers from the Starlite Hotel, Amanda, now heading up Blackwood's new employee advocacy program, even Maxwell Thornton, attending his first public event since being released from prison. As Sarah began her acceptance speech, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but she had remained true to herself and her values throughout. "I stand before you today not as a hero or a savior," Sarah said, her voice ringing clear through the auditorium, but as a reminder that each of us has the power to affect change. Whether you're a CEO or a janitor, whether you come from wealth or poverty, you have a voice. Use it. Stand up for what's right. Demand better from the companies you work for and buy from. As applause filled the room, Sarah's mind drifted back to the tiny Bronx apartment where her journey had begun. She thought of her mother's sacrifices, her father's courage, and the twisted path that had led her to this moment. The humble hotel maid had indeed triumphed. Not just over adversity and deceit, but over a system that had seemed immovable. Sarah Thompson Blackwood had changed the game, and in doing so, she had opened the door for countless others to follow in her footsteps. As she left the stage, Sarah's hand went to her locket one last time. "We did it, Mom," she whispered, a smile playing on her lips. "We really did it." And somewhere, perhaps in that great beyond, Elizabeth Thompson smiled back, filled with pride for the daughter who had taken her simple lessons of kindness and integrity and used them to change the world.